Welcome, I'm Mike Chastain, Children's Director here at Victory Church, and I'd love to invite you to like and subscribe below so that you never miss any content that we post here on the YouTube channel. And without further ado, the message you actually came here to see.
When you think about church, if I had to ask you, what do you picture, what's your picture of church? It really could be a million different things, depending on the person. A lot of times we think of buildings, we think of structures, because we think of that. Sometimes for some of you, it may think of a denomination, what denomination that you belong to or that you grew up in. There are large churches, there are small churches, there are empty buildings, and there are bursting buildings. There are whole variety of churches. But we don't want to get confused and think, well, this church better than this church, and this church is better than that church, and the bigger the building, the better the church. But we can think of buildings of churches that are probably, maybe even think of churches that are past, you grew up in, churches of the present, and some people are focusing on churches of the future. Not like theology changing, but just the future of the church. What's it going to look like? What's the next thing? And all these different ideas, and they're just based usually a lot of times in how you grew up. My first picture of church when I grew up was in Flint, Michigan. I went to St. Paul's, and I have the building first in mind. And I remember, because this maybe is the early 70s, that I remember it, and it was full. The mass exodus hadn't happened yet. It was still pretty full. And my church probably had about 1,000 people there every week. Right? And I grew up like that, and my picture of church was all the people, but I remember Pastor Ziley. And Pastor Ziley, he would stand at the door, and we'd walk out and say hello to him, and he'd always say, "Hello, friend," with a big smile on his face. And I was like, oh, wow, he's my friend, not knowing that was code for, I don't know your name. All right, I didn't know that. But I understood that, but I got that as my friend, and that was big church. And then things changed over time, bad, good, and different. But things happened, but that was my first picture of church. But then I met one of my students as part of my campus ministry in San Jose State. He's from Loyalton, California, which is the closest big city is Reno, and that's about an hour away. And so he and his church and 3 other churches shared a pastor, and so for him, church was 20 people on a Sunday morning. And so when he came to our church in San Jose, which had like 90, that was too big, and I'm like, no, this is too small. And so we have all these ideas about what church and church shouldn't be. And sometimes we forget the simple fact that as all these places are different, in a sense, they're also all the same. The fact is that a church is defined in the Bible as a church is a gathering of people around Jesus. That's it. A gathering of people around Jesus. In our theology, we talk about Jesus being like we celebrate in word and in sacrament. But it's the presence of God in there. In Matthew 16, Jesus says this. He says, I tell you, and he's talking to Peter, he says, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church. And the churches he's thinking of, I will build my church. He's not talking about buildings. He's talking about the word church is better translated gathering. The Germans who ruined it, sorry. Because in our words, in our translations, it turned it in from ecclesia, which is the gathering, to church, kirche, in Martin Luther's translation, which is the building, the gathering spot. But it's the ecclesia, the gathering of people. And he says, in this gathering of people, the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. And as far as I can tell, that hasn't happened yet. God's people still exist. As many times it's been tried to stomp out by different government factions, how even in the early church, as the kids we're talking about the different villains. You talk about people who are persecuting the church, who wanted to kill it, and they could not. People try to kill it in Russia, and they cannot. They try to kill it in Iran, and they cannot. The church of God still exists. The gathering of God's people still exists. But it's a gathering of people. Now, it's interesting. A gathering of people is a wonderful thing. But we all have our stuff. Now, something else I also experienced in church life. Growing up was great. Pastor was important. I knew that. But also making a huge impact was everybody else. And like anything, when you bring people together, everybody's got their stuff. There was a day this week, or a couple of weeks ago, I was sitting in the school office, and I was walking back from the school office. Actually, I was walking with Tim, and I was walking with another staff member, and they're giving me all the details on what's been happening at school and the lives of different kids. I'm like, holy cow, stuff moves so fast. And when did this happen? Really? And this and this and this and that? And I'm like, and we're a bigger school, but we're a small school comparatively. And we're in a controlled environment to a degree, as best we can. But everybody has their stuff. And churches are the same way. It's a ministry together. Everybody has their stuff. They're good things, they're bad things, and when it all comes together, it could be like acid or bacteria, where it just kind of piles up on itself. It can be explosive whenever you bring a group of people together. You say the gates of Hades could easily overcome it if it's just left up to the people. Because we all have our stuff. The stuff going on in your home, your experience in life growing up, things that may have happened to you. You're a child, things that just happened to you yesterday. Are you raising teenagers or little kids? Are your kids grown and out of the house? Whatever role you are playing in life, wherever you are in your marriage, wherever you are in your health, wherever you are in whatever it is, we bring our stuff. There's stuff that you're angry about. There's stuff that you're happy about. There's stuff. And we can come all together, and we all have our opinions, we have our problems. And when you put it all together, it can be overwhelming and even volatile. But how does God come into the middle of that and bring peace? And how does he bring you and me? I found out I don't know when I figured it out, but I remember at some point in my church life, we had people in our church that were very good at pointing out problems. Like I heard Pastor Ziley was Pastor Ziley. I don't even remember his first name, Fred. Let's just call him Fred. Saint Fred. And Pastor Ziley, and then he retired. And then Pastor Trost came in. And I love Pastor Trost. He was awesome. He was dynamic. He was, but then there are other people. One of my dad's best friends each Sunday would take out a stopwatch. Like, how long is he going to talk today? I loved listening to him because I went to the 8 o'clock service. And by the way, this is the same experience here. 8 o'clock, you get shorter version. 11 o'clock, you get longer version. It's just the way it is. And would do that. But then other people would be this, and other people would point out, it wasn't just the pastor I'm not talking about, but just talking about people. And you'd see gossip circles, and you would see different things just kind of happening and complaining. The stuff that wasn't good. And then he left, Pastor Trost left, and he took a call, moved on. And then another pastor came in, and people didn't like this or didn't like that, and then bad stuff happened, and it became volatile. And I remember I was sitting at a conference a little over a year ago. And Tim was there for this. Tim was there. We were at a church conference, and we're sitting there, and I didn't go to stuff that was specific for pastors because I'm old now. So I'm not learning. I've found out I don't learn things as quickly as I used to. I'm kind of set in my ways. I can learn some new things, but I want to learn what everybody else is learning. What are they doing? And I'd go to their sessions, and then I'd hear over and over again, hey, what do you do when the pastor does this? What do you do when the pastor does this? And I'm looking around, I look at my team, I said, do I do those things? And then they're like, no, you don't. You're actually good at this. Not perfect, but you're good at this, and this, and that. And so we came up with a session that I taught this year about how not to be the problem. How to not be the problem. Because we got a lot of people who know how to be the problem. Let's talk about how not to be the problem. And then in discovering it and studying it, it's not just for me, it's for everybody. It's for every person in every role in the church, for every person who's from the greeter at the door to the person setting up chairs to the person who does nothing, to the pastor, to everybody, to even in your own home. Because guess what? It's a gathering around, a church is what? A gathering around Jesus, and sometimes you have your gathering at home where God is, and how do you build His church? And Paul gives some absolutely wonderful wisdom about how not to be the problem. And we'll start in verse 1 of chapter 4. Paul writes this, he says, I, therefore, a prisoner of the Lord, reminding him of who he is, like, I'm in jail for this. This is important. I'm in jail for this. This is how important it is. I urge you, Ephesians, because no church is perfect. We wouldn't have the letters to the churches if those churches were perfect. Because Paul spends a lot of time correcting things. Philippians might be the only one, because that's just a happy letter. He doesn't really correct them on things, but he says this to the Ephesians. He says, I urge you to walk in a manner worthy of the calling to which you have been called. And that's just a big statement right there. You, not just pastor, but you as a Christian who follows the Lord, walk in a manner that is worthy of the calling to which you have been called. You're a child of God. What does that mean? How should you carry yourself as a child of God? It should be different in a manner worthy of this. And he says, but this is how you're going to do it. So to live worthily with all humility and gentleness, with patience, bearing with one another in love, eager to maintain the unity of the Spirit and the bond of peace. There's one body and one Spirit, just as you were called to the one hope that belongs to your call, one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all, who is over all and through all and in all. But grace was given to each one of us according to the measure of Christ's gift. We have been called to live a life of humility. And that's the key word for today. If you want to tune out right now, it's your opportunity. Humility, key word for today. We're going to come back to it again. Because humility says walk in a manner that is worthy with humility and gentleness. Because humility is a recognition that you need God and you need others. The world does not revolve around you. You need God. Who forgives your sins? Who has the ability to forgive sins? God. How do you get to heaven? Through faith in who? Jesus, who did what? Died on the cross and did what? Got up from the dead. How many of us can just get up from the dead? None. You can die for your own sins. That's no problem. But we need God. Every single human being on the planet. As Paul would, in Romans would write, therefore you've got no reason to boast about your life. Because you need him just as much as the person you hate. The person that you gossip about, the person that you don't like, the person that you don't love, those people, whoever those people are to you. You need God just as much as they do. but you also need others. You're not the smartest person on the planet. I am not the smartest person on the planet. There are things that I do well, but there's a lot of things that I don't. And humility is like, I need you, not you need me. You may need me, but I'm not going to tell you that you need me, because I need you just as much as you need me. And that we need each other. And we need each other for a whole variety of reasons. And again, the world does not revolve around me. And actually, repeat that phrase with me. The world does not revolve around me. Okay, I was waiting for you to say you. Okay, the world does not revolve around me. Okay? We all have an issue with humility. We all do. The good news is that humility is not intrinsic, but it can be learned. What I mean by that, it's not intrinsic. We are not naturally humble. We don't wake up humble. Somebody might be modest or something like that, but have you ever had people who are humble, but it's really, they're just modest about things, but inside they're telling the world what to do, you know? But it can be learned just by learning, right? You experience things and you can be humbled. Going back to that very first verse that we talked with Matthew 18, I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock, who's responsible for building the church? I. God says I am responsible for it. For a pastor, that's humbling. It's good news, too. It's fantastic news. Because oftentimes, part of the critiques in churches is like, oh, the pastor did this and pastor did that, and therefore this happened and the failure happened, or the success happened. And on this it says, I will build my church. And I'm going to do it, Jesus says, how I want to. I'm in charge of building the church. Who's responsible for success and failure? Jesus it's already a success. He says, just follow me. Follow me. And he claims responsibility. And I remember one time I was at a conference, different conference. This is one, almost 20 years ago. A little bit less than that. I was at a conference where this was pointed out to me, and it was hard to swallow because I was the new guy, and people were looking at me like, you're going to do something. And again, pastors get too much credit for success and too much credit for failures. But I remember being at this thing, and the pastor said, it's Jesus' responsibility to build the church. It's not you. You make sure you spend time with your family first, relationship with God first, then your family, and then the people. And at that time, we had a little boy at home, first child was born, Noah. New parents, relatively new marriage, and now spending a lot of time at the church. Every week during meetings, because everybody's volunteers, and you got to be everything to everyone. And I remember at this conference, I would go home every single day from this conference, and I would tell Amron everything that I learned. This speaker came, they did this, this, and this, and this. This guy, I skipped it. I didn't tell her. Because I knew she was like, well, when I want you to be home, I'm like, because those moments when I should have been home more. But I felt responsible for the church. And it took me a little bit to learn that. But humility is a key thing when it comes to the life of the church, that we need God and we need others. and that God is ultimately, Jesus is ultimately in control and how it goes. You know, how many times you think through it, it's like you've questioned and you've wondered where's the direction you're going, and then you realize afterwards, it could be years down the line, oh, God was right. What happens in life? God is right. But what happens with humility and how not to be the problem? How humility in your life, to live humbly with others, like be patient, to know that you're not the end-all, be-all. You've been a forgiven child of God. You can forgive other people. You can be patient with other people. And everybody has their stuff, and you can recognize that everybody has their stuff. Humility helps create a healthy family, I'd say a healthy church family. Because think about what humility does when you're humble and you serve and you want to serve others and be served by others, by the way. Be served, to serve, and to be served. One, it reduces anxiety and need for control because you're not in charge. You can be, it eliminates competition. You know, well, it's my idea against your idea. It's your church against my church. It's your family against my. It eliminates competition and actually invites collaboration to work together because you need everybody. You need the person sitting next to you. You need your husband. You need your wife. You need your brothers and sisters in Christ. You need each other. So it invites people together. It increases patience with people and plans. It increases patience with people and plans. It increases adaptability. About ministry is about for now. It's not necessarily for the past. It's about now. I always get people ask me, like, how did you guys handle COVID? You know, how did you handle the pandemic? And I'm like, our church rolled in a good way. We rolled with it. Shut down, and I'm like, why? And they're like, how did that happen? Other people were freaking out the whole time and flipping out about this and doing this and that. And I'm like, no, we rolled because God put the right people in the right place in the right time. I remember we needed camera lights, lighting for the things. And the next thing you know, Tim pulls out from underneath the stage, camera lights. Here, we need this. Like, what the heck? Where did that come from? I don't know. They're just here, right? We had stuff and ready to go. But I said, as far as the people go, I'm like, we just went through a merger. We sold stuff. We moved around in terms of chaos. This is nothing. Other people were suffering financially. Other churches suffering financially. How are you guys doing? I'm like, we just flipped online. And actually, we're better than ever. And then I was sitting with a group of pastors, and they were all, what are you doing? Oh, there was a lot of panic in the room you could feel. And I'm like, I felt bad because I couldn't join in their panic. In fact, I was embarrassed. Not embarrassed, but I didn't want to brag. Exactly, thank you, brag. Because what just happened? Well, we helped keep alive and help launch a resource center, and we just built a building and this and that. School's growing, you know, even to buy all this stuff, and church is in a healthier place, and it's like, and so it was just such a beautiful thing. The church is so beautiful that it increases the adaptability, increases when you're humble, it increases authentic communication. What I meant by that is like you don't have to worry about, is that person lying to me or not? You don't have to worry about that when you're humble because we all have mistakes. We're just talking about this the other day. It just comes up. Pastors and pastors' wives, leaders live different lives. And she asked me the question. She was like, why do different people hate us? No, it's okay because it's fair. It's a fair question because it says because of the position we're in. You have to make decisions. My loyalty is not to you. It is kind of, but my loyalty is to Lord first. And so stuff happens, you're going to make decisions, and some people aren't agreeing, and it's everybody's got their stuff, right? So everybody, how they react to things and this and that. And she got it, but it was just like, but it was like, okay. I said, there's stuff that I could have done better. Like, when this happened, I wish I'd done it this way. And there was a period of time where I'd go and beat myself up for things. But it's like, no, it's like, you're forgiven. Let's move on. Because who's in charge of the church? Christ is in charge of the church. You learn, you move on. You learn, you move on. And then authentic communication happens. And then I think one of the last points I'm going to have for this little section about creating a healthy church family, it increases the fun. When you're humble, you can get together, you can joke about things that sometimes people can't joke about, but you can have fun with things. You can have fun with your family. You can have fun with the people around you. You can laugh. And there's a statement that we have that Sarah's our administrative specialist is what we called it. I let her name. She was like, what do you want to be called? She said, I'm going to be called that. I said, there you go. Okay. And we would joke about it, but we should probably posterize this somewhere. But I think it's pretty accurate. And it's not up, let's listen to it. That really great poster, I think. We don't take ourselves too seriously, but we're serious about what matters most. We don't take ourselves too seriously, but we're serious about what matters most. What matters most is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and soul, and love your neighbor as yourself. We take those things seriously. But other things, it's fun. We make mistakes. Be humble. So humility allows this. But humility also allows for people to work in areas of giftedness together as equals. Areas of giftedness together as equals. Ephesians 4, as Paul writes, he says, but grace was given to each one of us according to the measure of Christ's gift. And then he kind of goes on a tangent, okay? See, when you read the Bible, it's fun to read because you can realize when Paul's like okay, this is what I mean by this. Okay, I said this word, this is what I need to mean by this. Let's get back on topic. And so he gets back on topic and he says, according to the measure of Christ's gift. We have one Lord, one faith, one baptism. We're all together. We're all together in this. But grace is given to each one of us according to the measure of Christ's gift. He gave the apostles and the prophets, the evangelists, the shepherds and teachers. By the way, it's like shepherds would be pastors. Notice it's not just he gave pastors to do the work of the church. No, he gave a whole bunch of different kinds of leaders and other people to learn and do to work things together to equip the saints. And the saints are not Saint Rose and Saint Mary and Saint this and Saint that. You are the saints. You are the saints to equip the saints for the work of ministry, for the building up of the body of Christ. There's no definition of what ministry is. It's just simply serving. There's a lot of different ways to serve and to do for building up the body of Christ. And in this sense, the mission belongs to Jesus. It doesn't just belong to me. The mission of the church doesn't belong to me. It belongs to Jesus. Remember, he said, I will build my church. And we're all members of one body. So therefore, the mission of the church belongs to everyone. I go back to my church, and I think about my church growing up. I knew Pastor Ziley. I was his friend. That's my only interaction I ever had with him. Once a week, he would talk. He would talk while I did the children's bulletin. And then as I got older, I would make ninja stars out of the children's bulletin. They do that kind of thing in church. Might pay attention, may not. He would talk, and he was my friend. That was my only engagement with Pastor Trost. I would hear him talk for a while, According to some people, his probably sermons weren't really that long. I mean, they were longer than this person and that person. My only interaction was when he was up there and maybe he taught a confirmation class, a section of our confirmation class. That's my only interaction. So it's not about me. Yeah, there are leaders and there are people like that, but the church was everybody else. And my experience of the body of Christ is what kept me in the body of Christ. It was the Sunday school teachers. It was the person hanging the bulletins. It was the VBS people. It was the people who were there. It was the Mr. Nagel who was running a relay race and he tripped and he fell and his toupee came flying off. It was those memories, of people and how they handled themselves and how they graciously handled themselves that I remembered that. It's the people. They all work together, and it all works together. And as we work together, I have my job to do as we work together. You need me to be the best pastor that I can be, so that you can be the best person or called person that you can be. But I also need you to be best you can be, so that I can be the best that I can be, because I have a role to play. But it's not your role, and all the roles are gifted, and they're together, and we operate together as equals, because the mission of Jesus belongs to everyone. And some people are better prophets, they're better evangelists, they're better teachers, they're better at this, and they're better at that, they're better at serving. In the church itself, what makes a church unique, it's not the buildings, this may be part of it, it may be this or that. What makes every single church unique and different is that each church is made up of unique individuals walking on different paths but working together in harmony of purpose. Let's let that sink in for a second. The church is made up of unique individuals. None of us are the same. We're unique individuals. We're walking on different paths. Jesus said that about the disciples. He said, Peter and John, Peter would always be worried about what everybody else was doing. And he said, Peter, I got your own path. Don't worry about him. I've got my own plans for him. So we all have a different path. But we walk in harmony because we gather around who? Jesus. So we gather in this path to follow Jesus. So we're coming together and we're working in harmony of purpose. And then we come together in periods of time on different paths. I look at my mom's church in Texas right now. And they joined there. They didn't join my mom. They didn't join their church because of, the pastor was amazing. My sister joined the church first because they had a preschool. And so they said, okay, we need to find a church. Preschool's got a church. Church has a preschool. We go to the preschool. And so people come in through our school and different ministries. They come in, and they're like, hey, this church looks good enough. Right? It looks good enough, so pastor's okay. All right. He preaches kind of long, but whatever it is, it's different, right? And so they joined the church. And then my parents, when they moved from Oklahoma to Texas to be near my sister. And so what did they do? They went to church when my sister went to church. Pastor's good enough. Church is good enough. They got involved in the church because that's what my parents do. My parents were immediate volunteers. Oh, there's a choir. My mom joins a choir. They do this and that's what my parents do. They're just those people. They just go in, they figure out what can we do. And then in a year or so, after a few years, their pastor, they just completed this building project. Beautiful new building, not in their sanctuary, but their new multi-purpose gymnasium is a beautiful thing. And they had 3 pastors on staff. They had the senior pastor, the associate pastor, the youth pastor. And when within a year, they were all gone. No, it's okay. It was okay because the pastor took calls. It's like no scandal happened. It was Pastor, Brahmer, he just took a call somewhere else. He would built the gym. It was time to go. So God called him someplace else. Pastor Phil. I think Pastor DJ was the next to go. Pastor DJ sounds like the youth pastor, and he was. And he took a call to do something else, and then Pastor Phil, who was the associate pastor, the people looked at him and said, oh, he's too young to be the senior pastor, and he read the writing on the wall, and so he took a call someplace else. And by the way, I wouldn't be here today if that didn't happen to me in my church in San Jose. Get passed over because I was just the young associate. You're like, darn it. Anyway, so I wouldn't be here today. And so it happens. And then they went through a period of time without a pastor, but it didn't mean they didn't have the church. They still had leaders in the church. They still had people that did things and ran things. They did the church life together because the mission of the church is never hinged to one person except for who? Jesus. Good shepherd never leaves. So you have this beautiful picture of gifted people working together as equals, doing the work of the church. Walking in different paths, but doing it in harmony of purpose. But then humility walking together with humility really forces you to ask this question of then, what's my role then in this? Forces you to ask that question. Because if you can't do everything, what's your role? And chances are your role is not telling everybody else how to do their job. How do you serve? Like I look back here, there's a quiet family in the back. Right now, I'm looking at Forrest. He's quiet because they're teenagers, and Bella and Maggie, and Aaron's on vacation this week with his family, with his cousins. They leave this church service at 8 o'clock and go set up chairs for the 11 o'clock. They don't go to the 11 o'clock service, but they want to help the church. I think Ken Wright, who leads Bible study now for how many years? About 30. You get to a point where you lose count, right? About 30 plus years. Tim back here, who has his just IT stuff and who God's gifted him in a lot of different ways, and people come to him for everything. He shows up. He gives time. I look at Jan, who's part of painting committees and doing different things. Judy and Karen, you offer music. Benita, different people who are just givers. Some people say, I can't do much, I just give. I look at my in-laws here, who are my in-laws. By the way, if you want to blame anybody for me being here, blame my father-in-law who put my name in the hat, right? God said, Pilgrim needed a pastor, so he said, hey, see how God works through everybody? God uses everybody to do anything and everything, and I don't have time to go through everybody here, but everybody see a personal connection in here with everybody, to even Randy in the back who, man, you got to give it up for Randy in the back who's, how old are you, 16? Every Sunday comes here, does 2 services, running pro presenter and things like that. Yeah, that's for a teenager. Notice whose sons aren't here. Mine, okay? And when my son was here during COVID, for those who remember, he was usually sleeping at the desk, right? He was usually falling asleep. You knew that. Because he's not that morning person. But it's just so, you just figure out, what's my role? How do I serve? And you don't really even need a class for it to tell you, here's your role in your class. No, you just figure out how to serve. What am I good at? What can I do? What's necessarily different than anybody else, but how does it work then together in harmony? And you'll find out that humility often thinks of just being humble, thinking less of yourself. No, humility does not diminish you. It actually makes you better and the people around you better. And I love Paul. He says, speaking the truth in love, we are to grow up in every way into him who is the head, into Christ, for whom the whole body, joined and held together by every joint with which it is equipped, when each part is working properly, makes the body grow so that it builds itself up in love. We all have our spot We have our roles. I can read this. I used to think it was no big deal. I used to, for the longest time, I didn't really think it was a big deal because I see stuff in here. It communicates very well. I communicate with it very well. And then you need to share that stuff, buddy. But there's a whole bunch of stuff I am not good at, and I don't need to be good at it. Because God's gifted us in a whole variety of ways. We belong to each other. And at this conference, I challenged the pastors to look in the room and to look at their church one day and to realize that I belong to you just as much as you belong to me. And that's a healthy church. And I look at our entire ministry. I look at all the kids. I look at the... like people were, what's our children's program? Like, oh my gosh, we've got an amazing children's program. We've got kids here 5 days a week. All grades from, kindergarten on through high school. And I'm their pastor. For so many of them, I'm it. I belong to them. They belong to me. They belong to you. You belong to them. And the church is a beautiful, beautiful thing. And what it does mean, though, in terms of all the things that we bring into a system, when we come at it with humility, we're bringing also the humility of Christ. And like to that acid, we bring a base. And we bring peace. Humble patience and how we work together. And how we work together.